Back, folks, from Assembly Hall, reporting on IU's first home loss of the season. Jimmy Cavanaugh joined by Ethan Euteneuer. Is that the correct pronunciation there?
That is the correct.
Because I was a little worried about it. Ethan covering the game tonight for IU Sport, videographer. Be sure to keep an eye out for his story. But first, Ethan, we're going to talk about what we saw in tonight's game. IU falling to the Badgers. Really tough game. First half, we saw an indication that might be the way it goes. It was a weird first half, a lot of back and forth, but it gave people an idea that IU was in for a test tonight.
Right. Cody Zeller started off real hot, real good inside presence. However, there wasn't much other production throughout the team. Watford started off slow. No one else was really producing as much as he was.
A great stat there. Cody Zeller, 18 first half points. Bo Ryan made clear that Zeller destroyed Berger. He said that in his post game. 18 points in the first half. His teammates really weren't there to help him out. They finished with 14 points. IU with a 32-31 lead at the end of the first. Second half, not so much. That's when things started to go bad a little bit. Talk about what we saw in the second half as things got underway.
Second half, pace started out slower. The Badgers came out, started off with a 5-0 run. The Hoosiers weren't really as
prepared.
Yeah,
ready.
See, it's tough to find the word because you couldn't describe the play that they came out of the halftime with. The bench, not much production at all. The only thing, the crowd was quiet. The crowd, I think, plays a big part in the Hoosiers' success here, especially playing at home in Assembly Hall. It's one of the major points. But yeah,
it was definitely rough for the crowd to stay into it throughout the game because we all know what Wisconsin likes to do when they come into an opposing building. They suck the air out of the place. They take the air out of the ball, and they try to play in the 50s. And they did a great job of that. They got a few more points on the board. The final score was a little beyond what they normally like. But they held Indiana to 27% shooting in the second half. Tom Crean didn't like the way his defense overhelped. How much of this was IU struggling, and how much of this was Wisconsin taking the Hoosiers out of their game?
Well, Wisconsin did a great job with the ball. They would wait down. They would kill shot clock time, and they would take good shots and good possessions with 5 seconds left on the clock. So it really killed the pace of the Hoosiers, how they like to get out and run. They like to run up and down the court. As you said, we usually play games 70s, 80s. They kept a slower pace, kept it in the 50s, and that really was slowed down. Wisconsin did a great job, not taking any credit from them. However, the Hoosiers did not get out and run like they usually do. They kind of sunk in and stayed and played pace with Wisconsin.
And Tom Crean actually addressed that as well, saying he didn't think they got bogged down in the transition game, but they still had issues getting out and reversing the ball where they're normally successful. They had trouble getting to the three-point line and getting good shots there because of the lack of ball movement. And overall, Crean just didn't seem like he was happy with a few different things, both on offense and defense. I talked about over-helping on the defensive end, but at the bottom line, at the end of the day, shots just were not falling. IU missed a lot of shots that they normally don't miss. Victor Oladipo, 3 of 7 from the floor. Cody Zeller, 1 of 7 in the second half. Just talk about what happens there when two of your best offensive players aren't able to get it going.
Well, if you don't have production, you're not going to win. They're the leading scorers on this team. They need to take charge and lead, and if they have no production, it's going to be hard to inspire the other guys that have production. So I think they play a key part in the Hoosiers' success, and unfortunately tonight they weren't able to pull it through.
Yeah, we talked about it earlier being just a weird game. There were some bad bounces. One of my favorite parts was Pat Driscoll drawing the ire of the Assembly Hall crowd time after time for really struggling to interpret traveling calls, not calling double dribbles. Fans were not happy about it, but Driscoll has been traditionally a pretty good official who I would say had an off night. You can't really dispute that, but they just had some unlucky plays too. I mean, there were a couple of times where Hoosiers ran into each other and lost a rebound to a Wisconsin player who was nowhere near the ball.
Right. There were a couple shaky calls, I believe, on some charges. I know one, there was no, his feet were dead. The Wisconsin player was not planted, and Oladipo got called for a charge when he was not set. So it was shaky, I would say.
Yeah, but there were a couple times where it just became apparent that this was going to be one of those nights where things were going to have to go right. And Tom Crean said it after the game that when you miss 34 shots, you need to have an awful lot go right for you. And it just didn't happen tonight. I think we're pretty good on the Wisconsin game. Would you say any final thoughts on what we saw in this game against the Badgers, what you're going to need to take from it going forward?
Taking from it, I believe you need to have more production with the offense. Tom Crean talked about in the press conference they need to add more cuts into their game. Christian needs to do it. He said Oladipo needs to do it. Remy, he focused on those guys being key players and starting the offense. And also more bench production on nights. The Hoosiers are second in the Big Ten, right behind Iowa in bench production for points. On a night where Sheehy goes 0 for 4, who's usually good for 10 a game. And then Remy not having a productive night either for the top 6th and 7th men from our bench. I believe with them having more production, Hoosiers will be able to key for more success.
Certainly hard to argue with that. With that, it might be a good time to bring in a special guest working tonight for WIUX. We're going to have him pulling double duty, and Will Chukerman now joins us on the post game. Will, how's it going?
It's going well. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
It's good to have you. Here, we're going to adjust this.
Put me in the camera.
We'll get you on camera.
Thank you.
You can squeeze in a little bit. We can get to know each other. Will, we're having you on because IU traveling to Northwestern, playing this Sunday in the third road conference game, a tough game against Northwestern, coming off a loss. What can the Hoosiers expect from the Wildcats, and what do they need to do in that game to come out with a W?
For Northwestern this season, it's going to be really tough to put together wins. They have a lot of injuries, and when I talk about injuries, it's not to just guys down their bench. It's to Drew Crawford, their leading scorer, out for the season. Reggie Herden's been banged up this whole season. Deshaun Cobb, a player who a lot was expected of him this season, suspended for the rest of the season due to team violations. So this Northwestern team's, I think, a shell of what they could have been. And what you're going to get out of this team, they're going to play hard. They're pretty well coached by Bill Carmody, who it seems like has been there for my whole lifetime. I know that. But it's not going to be too bad of a road game for Indiana. They're traveling, but it's going to be 60, 70% Hoosier fans out there. I was at the Michigan-Northwestern game. It was the same way there, and I expect Indiana to have a really good following because there's a bunch of people in Chicago who went to this fine university who are going to go out there and support this Indiana team.
Ethan, talking about that, with all that fan support, IU obviously going for another road game, there are going to be some Wildcat fans who want to see one of the top teams in the country knocked off. How do the Hoosiers have to deal with that going into that game?
I believe they need to stay focused on the game, not let the crowd affect them. They need to be taken from accounts of what Coach said needs to be improved tonight and included into their game plan for next game. Northwestern's a strong team. They're playing the Big Ten. You can't count any Big Ten team out this season. It is the strongest, one of the strongest conferences, arguably, in college basketball.
Saying that, it's important to note where this IU team was this time last year, actually January 18th. So the day that we are recording this, IU actually went to Columbus and got their heads handed to them on a plate by the Buckeyes.
You're putting it nicely.
Yeah. Then after that, going to Lincoln, Nebraska, losing to a really weak Nebraska team and setting off the panic alarm for IU fans. Well, my question to you, if IU drops a game to Northwestern, the depleted Northwestern team that you were just talking about, does it have a similar effect? Are we going to see a panic button pushed here in Bloomington?
The warning sirens will be definitely sounding after that game because I don't think there's really any excuse for losing to this Northwestern team come Sunday. It's tough to, like we talked about, there's no off nights or off days in the Big Ten, but against this Northwestern team, they should take it to them pretty handily. But like you talked about, just tonight, people are concerned about where this team is at right now, how they stack up against the other top teams in the country, whether or not Tom Crean is one of the elite coaches. So people are already starting to wiggle in their chairs a little bit. In a loss at Northwestern, I don't want to think about it really right now because we've got a lot of talking to do if that happens.
And we've got a lot of time, basketball speaking, between now and then. I'm sure people will talk about it, but might as well wait till the game ends up being played, and we'll see how it rolls out. Fellas, any final thoughts before we send this thing home?
I think you guys covered it nicely. I was listening alongside. Perfect. Well done.
Glad to have your approval, Will.
Thank you.
Ethan, anything to throw in?
Other than excited for future Big Ten play, I think we wrapped it up pretty well.
Still some games on the schedule, folks. Still plenty of time for this IU team to acquit themselves. Remember this time last year, they were beginning to struggle, pull out of it during February. It's going to be worth watching to see if they pull a similar act this season. That's all the time we have for Will Chukerman, for Ethan Euteneuer on my right here. You've been watching the post-game recap on IU Sportcom. Good night, folks. Travel well. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you next time. Thanks very much.